Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
For the past 5 years, a fire has been smoldering beneath a landfill in a densely populated suburb of St. Louis. Now, that's not really that unusual. What makes it unusual is that it is less than a quarter of a mile from a large deposit of nuclear waste with no barrier in its way. The residents there were surprised to find out this material was even there in the first place. The EPA is like, don't worry, you might just get a little radon dust, which radon is the leading cause of lung cancer, and of course it increases your chances of bone, liver, and breast cancer. Now, my guest today is Dawn Chapman. She is a resident and activist. She's been leading the charge to raise awareness of this with JustMomsSTL.com and STLRadwaste.com. So, Dawn, thank you so much for joining me. I see sitting next to you is Scott Kahneman. Scott, actually, your grandfather was the foreman working with Mallinckrodt, which is, of course, the company who was responsible for dumping this nuclear waste there in the first place under the cloak of national security secrecy there in the suburbs. So we'll get to you in just a minute. But Dawn, so what really prompted you to get involved? What was the first thing that you sort of learned what was happening at the Westlake landfill?
In the matter of a couple of hours after speaking with the state agency, I learned that there was a fire burning in a landfill and that the landfill was a Superfund site. And, you know, the agency was telling me, oh, this is really complicated. This is really serious. And then they said, well, you haven't heard anything yet. You know, next to that landfill, adjacent, but directly in contact with the landfill is nuclear weapons waste. And I had no idea that St. Louis even played the role that it did in the Manhattan Project, that we processed uranium for the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So my little world was shattered. This whole secrecy thing just really caught me off guard. And really I felt betrayed because I thought, how in the world was I allowed to buy a house next to this site and nobody had to tell me about any of this? You know, if my house would have had lead paint, somebody would have had to have let me know that. That would have had to have been disclosed. But it turns out you can buy a house next to a Superfund site and next to the world's oldest nuclear weapons waste in the world. And your government, nobody has to tell you anything. Nobody has to say anything to you.
Wow. And so you only learned about this in 2013 when you called state officials to complain about the smell. And I reported that the smell was so bad, I guess the attorney general there was actually suing the company responsible for this site. And that was how you learned about it, and just baffled, I guess.
I am too. My neighbors had no idea either, you know, and it is such, the Manhattan Project, even now in St. Louis, is so secretive. And I think that's how it's been allowed to get everywhere. You know, it's been allowed to leak into creeks and sit on landfills for 42 years. I mean, we're starting to see the legacy of that. We're starting to see the effects come out in our kids and in our loved ones. And, you know, there are people coming forward that are in the groups right now. You know, some of us live here, some don't. Some, like Scott, live here and have a direct contact. You know, he lost his grandfather from the Manhattan Project. It's just, we're all linked by this, and it's very surreal. It's a very surreal thing to be linked by.
Right, and there's actually an article from about 2013 talking about St. Louis's nuclear legacy, how it might be more dire than anyone can even imagine, talking about how the children who grew up playing in the creek or near the Westlake, how they are now starting to see the symptoms of playing in these affected areas. People 40 years old are dying from really rare cancers, non-smoking lung cancer, for instance, but also autoimmune diseases, birth defects. There's, I guess, more than 2,500 cases of cancer being reported on one of the main pages where they're collating a lot of the data from people who are bringing their information forward with this.
Right, and that's just heartbreaking. You know, the other thing that we're seeing is that, unfortunately, we're seeing little children who never grew up in the area but are children of the exposed that are coming down with cancers. You know, sometimes it skips a generation, and that's heartbreaking. But, you know, these are citizen documented cancers. You know, the citizens are coming forward. But we also had the state of Missouri They did an overview of the zip codes that appeared to be affected with Manhattan Project waste that were, that they can say for certain, yeah, there's little areas where this waste has sat out. And the state last fall, 2014, came out with their health assessment for the area, and it's not good. I mean, in this area where we sit right now, next to Pattonville High School here, we have a 302% increase in childhood brain cancers and neurological cancers. That is a 302% increase. And we're a tight community, man. We know those kids. We've done GoFundMe's for those children. We've watched them get diagnosed, watched them die. I mean, this is devastating to us.
Wow, that is incredible. And I went to Pattonville High School, so that is so shocking to me. What do you think about the response from the EPA? Just, they're really only speaking about this stuff now because you've been so active in trying to educate and raise awareness of this issue that kind of forcing their hand. The officials are squabbling, and the EPA says, we don't agree with the finding that the subsurface smoldering event is approaching this radiologically impacted material. It's fine. Everything is fine. And they just, last week, the schools finally sent out a letter to parents in the case that there was some sort of catastrophic nuclear event. Here's how you can protect yourself. How do you feel about that response?
Well, I'm very angry with the EPA right now. Superfund, this is a Superfund site, so we're talking about the Superfund program within EPA. The way that works is the owner of the site, so the one that caused the mess, gets to use their own scientists and has them write up reports, has them collect data, and then once those reports are written, then they're handed over to EPA. So this isn't EPA science. This is science given to the Environmental Protection Agency from the company responsible for the fire, who is currently also being sued by the Attorney General. And this is EPA looking over that data and rubber stamping it. Wow. This isn't an independent set of eyes. If I hit your car, there's no way you're going to let me take your car to my mechanic. That's just not how it works. And unfortunately, in this situation and with this federal agency, that's what's being allowed to happen in this community. Incredible.
And now, Scott, how do you fit into this story? Obviously, I know this is affecting you as a resident there, but talk to me a little bit more. I mean, this is really shocking to you, I guess.
Yeah, so as you mentioned earlier, my grandfather was the foreman at Mallinckrodt Chemical Works. He was there through the Manhattan Project and up through the Cold War. And safety standards were different in those decades, almost non-existent. The story of the way these employees were intentionally and knowingly exposed by management to these toxic and radioactive substances it would probably put the Tuskegee experiment to shame if it ever actually came out. It's just that dire of intentional human experimentation. My grandfather, notwithstanding, he was the foreman there. There was radioactive dust circulating and toxic dust circulating all around these facilities. And, he'd go in and out of there and he'd have the dust on his hands thinking there's, it's no big deal. It's just like if you're a mechanic, you have grease on your hands, it was just something that happened because of your job. Well, he'd come home with the dust on his hands and he'd hug his wife and play with his kids. And then, radiological illness struck and he ended up dying with a radiologically induced lung cancer. We found out he was exposed to beryllium, uranium, plutonium. All the daughter products of uranium that happened during the processing. He was exposed to it all. So were all of his coworkers. Right. And this led the U.S. government to pass a piece of legislation called the EEO-ICPA. I believe it was EOICPA 2001 or 2002. We call it EOICPA, and sorry, that's an acronym, but it's the EEO-ICPA. And it provides government compensation for survivors of Manhattan Project experimentation. And how strange is that? So my family went through that EOICPA process, and they put, this paperwork was intense, and they had to reconstruct his circumstances on records that don't even exist anymore. Right. You can't. Records don't even exist anymore.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the big issues that people have with these cases. They're from decades ago, and so I can't wait to get to St. Louis and speak with you all in depth. Do a really great interview with you guys, with a lot of other family members there as well. Like you said, they had no idea that they were even transporting this material and then going home to their families. So thank you all so much, and we'll be seeing you next week. Now, to stay up to date with what's happening with the St. Louis radiological waste, you can visit Don Chapman's Facebook page. It's facebook.com/Westlake Landfill. You can also go to Just Moms STL, as well as STLRadWasteLegacy.com. Myself and Josh Owens will be out there next week. We're going to do some in-depth reporting on everything that's going on there in St. Louis, as well as investigating the history with Mallinckrodt Chemical Works and the way that they treated their employees who are now suffering. Their family members are suffering years later. The symptoms are finally starting to show there with children who were playing in and around the area that all of this radiological waste was being dumped secretly under the guise of national security. And we're also going to be reporting on some of the other secret government testing that was going on there on the population of St. Louis, unbeknownst to them, all during the Cold War. And people want to say that the government, they wouldn't do that to you. They wouldn't test chemicals on you. And meanwhile, they're trying to send us to a war in Syria over those very same allegations of chemical weapons being used on the population. So this is a very serious story. Infowars.com will be bringing you all the news you need to know about St. Louis's nuclear legacy.
Knockout is back. If you want a product that has 10 known ingredients that naturally get your body to relax, your brain to relax, so you get deep, restful sleep, Knockout's it. Infowarslife.com. L-theanine, hops flower extract, lemon balm extract, valerian root extract, chamomile flower extract, L-tryptophan extract, melatonin, and more. All organic, all the natural sources. It's the same price as leading brands of melatonin that are 3 milligrams apiece. It has 3 milligrams, the standard recommended dose for an adult. It's got the GABA, so it would probably cost $50 to take all this as separate pills. It's $19.95. You take 1 or 2 of these, and it just is really clean, restful sleep is what the reviews are. It's what I've experienced. And it just synergistically puts everything in there. Infowarslife.com. That's Infowarslife.com. Or call 888-253-3139.
You are watching the Infowars Nightly News, which airs 7 p.m. Central at InfoWarsNews.com. And your support is helping us defend liberty worldwide.